All right, so today we're going to learn how to edit our activism project, and we're going to be using this set of Google Slides to help us. So I have it visually laid out here on the slides, as well as a visual demonstration for you to follow. You're going to be using quite a few different tools in Photopea to help you combine these three images. Um, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of demonstrate each tool as we go along, and you should be following along and doing what I'm doing here, okay? So first of all, the first image that we're going to be adding is this stomping foot image. All right, so let's go and do that. Let's go ahead and add that stomping foot image by coming over here to Photopea. And but when we're all said and done, it's going to look something like this. Okay, so we're going to have three images and they're all going to look like this. And we're going to end up putting, even though we're going to add the stomping foot image first, we will end up putting in a third image that will actually go in the middle of these three layers. Okay, but let's go ahead and select our stomping foot image first and add that and get that ready to go. So what we'll do is come over here to our stomping foot image. We will go to select all, and then we'll do an edit copy. And we will come back over here and do an edit paste or a control V, and that'll put that in. And what you're going to note is that this is a large foot. We obviously need to change the size of this. So I'm going to come over here with my pointer tool, come down to the corner, holding my shift key. I want to make sure I hold the shift key to keep it in proper aspect ratio. And I'm probably going to need to, change the size of it a little bit more, but that's okay. Then I'm going to click on the little confirm check mark, and I'm going to come over here to edit, transform. I'm going to flip it vertically so it's upside down, and then I'm going to go back here to edit, transform, and I'm going to flip it horizontally. Now, one thing you want to explore here is for your project, you may want to explore all these options and see what works best for you. You might want to explore scale, rotate, distort, perspective, warp, rotate 90 degrees to the right, rotate 90 degrees to the left, rotate 180 degrees, or flip horizontally or flip vertically. Now, it really depends on what you're doing, and you're going to want to explore and see which of those edit transform tools will work best for your project. So I'm actually going to make this foot just slightly bigger right about there and check mark. Okay. Now I'm going to click back on my background layer because I'm going to put in between the two layers here, I'm going to put in another image, which is this image right here. Okay. So I'm going to go select all, edit, copy. And I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to do a edit paste, and I'm going to put that in the middle, okay? And it's going to take over the whole layer, and that's okay, okay? Because we're going to change some things around in a minute, and you'll see how it all will work together. So now I'm going to go to edit, transform, and I'm going to flip it horizontally, okay? So let's come back over here to our slides. We put that in. We put the middle image in, and we flipped it horizontally. Okay, so make sure you kind of like read these pages here. Okay, read them, follow along with the slides as well as my video. Okay, so now the next step is we're going to explore some blending modes. Okay, so we're going to come over here, and the blending modes are here. And these are very cool tools because they can adjust an image in a lot of different ways. And you can see that you have a lot of choices here, okay? You've got darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, darker color, lighten, screen, color dodge, linear dodge, lighter color, overlay, soft light, hard light, vivid light, linear light, pen light, hard mix, difference, exclusion, subtract, divide, hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. Okay, so on layer number 2, I'm actually going to change this to darker color. So you'll note here that all of a sudden, the foot is now showing on the background layer. Okay, so we've got background, we got the foot showing, and we got the person showing, but we've got this awkward square here on layer 1. Okay, guess what? This is where we start to add some layer masks. Okay, so what we're going to do is come over here to our directions and read the fact that, yes, I just did the darker color blending mode to layer 2. And now it's time to explore layer masks. Okay, so there's a couple different tools that we have to use in Photopea to activate our layer masks. So first of all, we need to add a layer mask, and we're going to add it to layer 1 and layer 2 by clicking on this little button on the right-hand corner of Photopea. So it's right here. So we're going to add a layer mask and layer 2 layer mask. Let's come back to here. The next thing we need to do, well, first of all, let me explain what a layer mask does. A layer mask will basically remove parts of an image that you don't want. So anything black in these layer masks are the parts of the image that were removed. So for example, on layer 2, we want to remove that hard-edged box. So that's why we see black going around the hard edge. And on layer 1, we want to remove a few kind of like weird black, gray that kind of showed up in the sky. So, and that was because of the blending mode. So I'm going to take some of that out. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to select a tool brush to help us with this. So we want to click on our tool brush, and we want to select a nice soft mechanical 24 pixel brush here. And then we want to make the size of our brush, fairly large so that we can easily manipulate and remove the areas that we want to remove on the layer mask. And the final step is that we need to use our background, our foreground and background. We want to set our foreground to black and our background to white. Okay, let's come over here and let's start doing that. Okay, so I'm going to start with the top layer first. I'm going to activate my layer mask by clicking on it. I'm going to come over here and select a nice brush tool, and I want a nice soft mechanical brush, and I'm going to see the size of it. It's just too small, so I'm going to make it bigger. All right, so that's good. So I'm using probably like a 700 size brush, and I want to have my opacity about 50% so that it's kind of gradually coming off, or maybe 75. Maybe 75% is good. So that kind of gradually is removed, and then I'm going to have my black over white, and I can kind of like switch these easily back and forth by clicking on this little arrow button. And I want to have my foreground set to black and my background set to white. And so now I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to start removing that edge. I don't want that edge, but I also want to be careful that I don't accidentally remove the body from the image. So I'm going to have to kind of fix that a little bit on the left side of the image where I accidentally removed too much of the body. And see, look at the layer mask, see how it's kind of making that black U shape. So now if I want to put back the body, what I have to do is come over here and reverse this, put white over black. And this time I'm going to move my opacity down to about 25% so that I can kind of slowly but gradually add back that body that I accidentally removed from the image. And then put this black over white again so that I can like go. I'm also going to make my brush a little smaller. I can use my bracket keys, or I can just, make my brush just a little bit smaller and just get rid of that line there. I don't like that line. And I don't like how blue this is on the foot. I want to show some of the clouds here a little more. And then I want to take off some of that white in the shoe here. I want that shoe to be nice and black. Okay. Now on what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my navigator here, click on my navigator button, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I don't really like this weird gray color here, and that's from the blending, the darker color blending mode. So I'm going to remove some of that weird kind of gray effects. And I'm going to make my opacity just a little bit higher so it goes a little faster here. I'm noticing that a little bit of the edge of that image went into the head here, so I'm going to remove that. Close my navigator so I can see what I'm doing a little more here. Remove that edge from here, and then come back over here to this layer mask and take out some of that weird kind of gray effect. Maybe put this to 100% to get rid of this edge here. I'm kind of going and removing that edge there a little bit. Removing some of the gray effects. I'm going to back out, Control minus. Make my brush a little bigger and get rid of some of this. But I don't want to get rid of my hand, so I'm going to like put that back in. Make my brush a little smaller, maybe reduce the opacity down just a tad bit so I can really control what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of working these images and kind of going back and forth and adjusting images a little bit to see how they're blending in. I've turned off the top layer so I can really control the blending of the image a little more. Add the top layer and just kind of looking at this and realizing that I think I want to expand this out a little bit, and we'll remove this white here a little bit. Get rid of some of that blue still. Okay, so now I think I'm happy and I've got all three layers. So let's come over here, and it's really going to be you kind of going back and forth on these layers until you are happy with the way it looks. Okay, so removing parts on these two layer masks. Okay, now I'm going to come over here to the activism project slides, and we have done this. Now we've explored our masks a little bit, and we're going to come now, and I'm going to show you another way that you can add in an image. Okay, this is using the quick selection tool. And so I'm going to turn off this layer here, and I'm going to show you how you can add that image. I'm going to come over here and go to deselect. And what I'm going to do is come over here and click on this quick selection tool, which is in the middle. And I'm going to click on the little plus sign up here as soon as my image analysis is done. And then I'm going to click on this little plus sign, and I'm going to go in with a fairly small brush, and like 137 for what I need. And I'm just going to select, and you see how it selects all of the edge of the person and leaves the blue sky. You really can only do this with a really contrasty image. If you have an image that's not very contrasty and there's a lot of like different value tones in the image, then I recommend you use the first technique I showed you, where you just put in a layer mask and blend it in with a layer mask. After I did my selection, I noticed that it went a little bit further out of the boundaries than I wanted it to. So I'm going to go in with my negative, and I'm going to kind of bring this in a little closer. Okay, so that's just going around the edge of the image. Okay, again, like I said, only do this with a contrasty image, because unfortunately Photopea is not as good as Photoshop when it comes to the quick selection tool. But it's not the end of the world, and I'm showing you ways to work around it. So I'm clicking on Refine Edge now, and you want to keep it a border of 3. You want to select background, and you want to make sure new layer is selected, and then you want to say okay. So what's going to happen? It's going to basically put this onto its own layer. All right. So now what you want to do is you want to copy and paste this image by going up here to select all, edit, copy, come over here and go edit, paste. Okay, so there we go. So now we need to move this, right? We need to move this. And another way you can flip it is just to kind of go to the corner like this and just kind of like turn it. That's another way you can flip your image really easily. And then I'm going to move it up here. I'm going to hold my shift key and make this smaller. Move it over. In some ways, I kind of like, for this particular image, I think I like using this technique for this particular image, okay? I think it works maybe a little bit better than using this tool, this technique with the layer mask for only this image though, okay? For image number 2, it was definitely a good idea to just to copy the whole image, paste the whole image in, and then use the blending mode, okay, to make it blend in. So, all right, so now what I'm going to do is come back over here and see that, yes, I followed all these directions and I placed it, and there it is, okay. And now it's time to add in a brightness and contrast layer and a black and white layer, okay. So what I'm going to do is come over here and go over here to my adjustment layer and put a brightness and contrast layer above everything, okay? And then I'm going to make it brighter. It needs to just be a little bit brighter, and then I'm going to close it by clicking on PRO, Properties. And now I'm going to add in a black and white layer, and I'm going to close that up. Okay, because what I want to do is I want to come over here on my brightness and contrast layer, and I want to make this right side a little bit darker. It's just a little bit brighter compared to the left side of the image. So I'm going to come over here and use my brush tool again. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger using my bracket key on my keyboard. Or I can come over here and use this, but I recommend using the bracket key because it's a lot faster to adjust your brush. And what I want to do is I'm going to click over here and I'm going to remove some of the brightness so that it kind of balances with the left side a little more. It has a little more contrast. So look at that. You see how the layer mask is looking a little bit darker now because I'm removing the brightness from the image. So now I'm going to come over here to my black and white layer and I'm going to open up my black and white, and I want to adjust the cyan in this image so that it's a little more contrasty. I'm going to bring it down and make it a little bit darker. And now I'm going to close my properties and I'm going to go back into my brightness and contrast layer, and I'm going to bring up the contrast so that there's a little more contrast in the sky. And then I'm going to close my properties. Okay, so here is the brightness and contrast layer, black and white layer, and it shows just a little more contrast here. And I also might just make this just a tad bit brighter as well. Okay, so now I'm done. So part 2 is exploring text. There are many different types of fonts that you can use. You can adjust the size, you can adjust the color of the font, and you want to choose a font that's really going to help to get across the mood of your image, the theme, to help to build the theme of your image. So I use Bungee Inline because it has like a strong font style, and I use that for the words inequality and equality. And I also chose a desaturated color of red, which is kind of like a pink color. And then I went in and used a sponge brush to remove some of the font to make it look like it's kind of being eroded away, because the idea of this is that we're stomping out inequality. So I really wanted to get that feeling with the word inequality and how I use the color, the font style, and how I eroded away some of the actual font by using a special brush that I'm going to be showing you. Okay. And then I left the word equality in bright red going across the chest with the hand raised to show that we're stomping out inequality and we are embracing equality. Okay, so we're stomping out inequality and we're embracing equality. So you want to click on your text tool on the vertical toolbar so that you can start to start putting in some of your text. You want to explore your font. So I'm going to come over here, click on the very top black and white layer here, click on my text tool, and then I want to come over here and pull down from the menu. And you can do a search for a font, or you can leave that blank. So if you don't want to, like I know some of the names, I knew Bungee Line was one of the fonts, Destroy is another font. But what you could do here is just kind of figure out like what font would work for you. And I recommend you kind of start to look through these font styles to see which one would work for you. Okay. So once you do that, then you may not know the size yet, okay? You may need to kind of play around with size, but you might know the color you want, so you can kind of select that. And then you might need to just kind of go use your little pointer tool and figure out, don't worry about where you put your font yet. Okay. So inequality. And I want to fit this in the shoe. So what I'm going to do is I'm using the pointer tool now. I'm just going to kind of move it over here and I'm going to rotate it using this, and I'm going to kind of stretch it out a little bit and maybe make it a little bit shorter, but I don't want to keep it so perfectly straight like this. So if we come over here and let's look here at our activism project, we're going to be using some font manipulation, okay? And this font manipulation is done by clicking on warp, okay? So what we're going to do is click on, we're going to go ahead and select our font, highlight it, and we're going to click on warp. And I want you to explore all the different ways you can manipulate the word. You can do an arc lower, arc upper. You can do a general arc that's maybe not too arcs. You can do a bulge, a shell lower, a shell upper, a flag, a wave, a fish, a rise, fisheye, inflate, squeeze, twist. Okay. And I think I'm gonna try arc. Nope, that's not the one I want. I want arc. Okay. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play around with the bend. I don't want it to be really bent too much, but I do want it to be a little bit bent. I'm also gonna play around with the horizontal distortion, making it a little thinner at the heel and making it a little bit wider at the front of the foot. And I'm going to leave the vertical distortion pretty much as is. Now I'm going to click OK and check mark, and it's going to place it. Okay, now I'm going to use my little pointer tool, and I'm going to like just kind of fine tune it a little bit and see how that looks. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a layer mask, activate my layer mask, and I'm going to use a brush tool to erase some of the inequality by coming over here and selecting this one right here. It's kind of, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, maybe about a quarter of the actual size of the font. And I'm going to put my opacity about 50%. And I'm just going to click in here and start removing some of the word and make some areas darker than others and some areas lighter. And I'm just going to remove some of this word to make it look like I'm stomping out inequality and I'm getting rid of inequality. All right, now I'm going to show you the next step. Okay, so you should have read all the directions on slide 12. Slide 13 basically talks about how to use the warp and how to use the brush tool. Slide 14, I'm going to show you how you can duplicate the layer. You can duplicate the layers. So this is an easy way to not have to do all these steps all over again. Okay, so we can come over here and we can go and we can duplicate this layer. And now we can use our pointer tool and we can move it, place it over here. I'm going to have inequality going in this direction. And I'm going to make it slightly smaller by holding down the shift key, make it smaller. And I'm going to check mark it. I'm also going to go in and select it again and do warp. And I'm going to kind of just change the warp a little bit on this so that it's smaller at the Y and wider at the I. And I'm going to click OK and check mark that. And there we go. Now we've got inequality placed in here again. And I didn't have to type it up again. All I had to do was just duplicate the layer and warp it slightly and make it smaller. Now the next step is I'm going to write equality going across the chest here. But this time I'm going to make my font nice and bright red. And I'm going to warp it a little bit, but first I want to make it go this direction. I'm just going to place it in here. I want to fit the whole word in just to kind of see how it looks. And then I'm going to select it, highlight it, the whole word, and I'm going to go to warp and kind of arc it a little bit, but or maybe I don't know, I kind of have to play with it a little bit to see how I want to manipulate it. Maybe I'm going to arc it a little bit and make it not so bended. Maybe make the Y a little smaller. Let's see. Okay, check mark. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to tilt it a little bit and bring it down. Check mark and place that in there. Okay. All right. So that's where I want it. Okay. Now, let's come over here and let's go to the next slide and we can kind of see how it looks here. This is, I've done a couple versions of this, so you can see that this is slightly different than the way this one looks, but they're fairly close. And here are all the layers. And to add more text, you just follow these same steps. And so in the next project, what I did was in the next steps I did was I use the words marginalized, microaggression, insignificant. Okay. I used a font called Destroy. So if we come over here, we can look at that font. Click on the font here, and I'm going to show you how to actually find that font really easily by just clicking in Find and just put in the word Destroy. Select it. Okay. And then you can type your words, so I can type the words insignificant. This time I want to make my font, my color kind of a gray color. So I'm going to make this kind of gray color here. Going to move, if we look at this, the final image here, we can see that the word insignificant is kind of coming along the edge of the shoe at the top. So now what I'm going to do is take that and kind of turn it. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit, make my font, I think, a little smaller. It's just a little too big, so I'm going to move this, make it a little bit smaller for now. And going to move it over here. And then I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. And I'm going to check mark it, and I'm going to select it again. This time I'm going to warp it, and I'm going to give it a little bit of an arch, but not that much. Okay. And let's see, do I want to stretch it out a little bit? Okay. And now I'm going to move this closer. Okay. And I'm going to move this closer, rotate it. And now I'm going to show you how to use the liquify tool to manipulate this image. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to filter liquify. We're going to say, okay, it says the layer has to be raster sized. So that's fine. We click OK on that. And I want you to explore these tools. So if we look over here, the filter liquify, we've got these various tools you can use. You got the smudge, the smoothen, the twirl, the shrink, the blow, and push to left. And then this one right here is the reconstruct tool, and that is used to undo something you don't like. Okay. Well, what I'm going to be using is this tool here, which is the smudge tool, and I'm going to have to adjust the size of my brush. And actually, I'm thinking about making my font just a little darker because I like it better here with the darker font. And I'm going to make my size about 350. Looks like about 357 is the brush size I need. But first, I'm going to come over here, look out of there, and I'm going to go back to my free transform before I rasterize this image. And I'm going to reselect this font, and I'm going to make it darker for now, okay? And I'm going to move it down just a little bit. Okay. And now I'm going to go over here to filter, liquify, rasterize the image. And what I'm going to do is use this smudge tool. Now, you want to click on background. Okay, you want to see all your work. So you want to make sure you click on background and you want to zoom out. So you want to do a control minus, control plus will zoom in, control minus will zoom out. So you hold the control button and you just use the minus tool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to move this word closer, but that's not what I want. It's too much. So I'm going to rasterize that and fix that back to normal. And what I've come to realize is that I probably am going to need to move this insignificant word a little bit closer. So I'm going to say okay. And you might have to let your computer think a little bit. Okay, I'm going to move this just a little bit closer in. Okay, just a little bit closer in. There we go. Now I'm going to come over here to filter, liquify. I'm going to click on my smudge tool, and I'm going to move the T a little bit closer to the body so that it's taking on the shape of the body. And I'm going to move this I a little bit closer as well. And there we go. And I'm going to say okay. And now I'm going to do this same steps, the very same steps for um, microaggressions and marginalized. And I'm going to put the microaggressions going along the bottom shoe and marginalized going along the top in between the stomping foot and the person with their fist raised. Okay. So you're going to follow these very, very same steps. And once you're done, then the final step, once you've put in all the 3 words, I'm not going to demonstrate all the 3 words because you saw the first one with insignificant. So you're going to follow the same process for microaggressions and marginalized. Once you're all done, what we're going to do is lower the final opacity down to 50% to make the words disappear a little bit. Okay, so let's go over here to my final image. I'm totally done now. And let's open up all of these layers. So here's my brightness and contrast layer, turning that on. Black and white layer, my inequality. Okay, my equality. I've got the word insignificant. Here's what it looks like at 100%. Okay, here's marginalized. Here's what it looks like at 100%. Here's microaggressions. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to reduce the opacity so that they're disappearing. We're going to change it to 50%. So that we are making those words disappear, because the whole message of this piece is to stomp out inequality and to have equality. Okay. And so when we're done, this is what it's going to look like. And if we come over here and we look at our final piece, we can see all our layers. We've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 10, 11 layers. And also put a copy of this in your Google Slides, and we'll have further instructions that we're going to be doing as we move closer to actually working on our final project. But all of these tools you can use, and they're super powerful tools. So you've learned about opacity, how to manipulate text, how to use the liquify tool, how to use the edit transform tool, how to copy and paste images, and how to use layer masks. Okay?